It is, in fact, a National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. We have Emmie Paulos and Kathryn Avila, their attorneys at the 11 Papantonio Rafferty Law Firm, with us today to talk about that. When we talk about human trafficking, you know, it sounds like one of those things, we hear the term a lot, but it's something that's happening somewhere else, and we have this image of it. What is human trafficking?
So human trafficking happens nationwide, and it happens in our community, but it's basically using a person by force, fraud, and coercion to engage in labor or commercial sex activities against their will.
We say that it happens right here in the community. What forms does it take? I mean, are we looking, when we talk about forced labor, I mean, it's something that's hard for us to picture, that you're making someone go to work for you.
Right. Well, it can look like your everyday, you know, housekeeping services. It can look like your everyday nannies that help out with the kids. You know, personally, I am Filipino, so back home in the Philippines, there are a lot of people there that want the American dream. And so traffickers, they often prey on those vulnerabilities and, you know, promise things like a better life, bring them over to the United States often, and then take away all of their freedom and everything and, you know, force them into labor, having them work constantly. So it can take on many different forms.
How do we identify it? How do we know it? How can we tell that someone is being trafficked?
There's a lot of red flags that you can look for. For instance, there's two forms of trafficking. You have labor trafficking and you have sex trafficking, but they do have a lot of commonalities. But you see, usually it's a victim. They don't look you directly in the eyes. They kind of sit back. They let the trafficker kind of transact the action. They're usually malnourished, quiet. When it comes to sex trafficking, you know, their attire might be inappropriate for like the day or the weather. You usually, they don't like provide their IDs. And so there's these signs: bruises, physical appearance, malnourishment, are some, you know, telltale signs that you could look for.
How do you differentiate when we talk about sex trafficking, especially the sex and trafficking, that the difference in that and prostitution? You know, people say, well, is it something that someone is willingly wanting to do? And how do, I mean, do I step in? Do I call law enforcement? What does a person do?
Honestly, it is very difficult to differentiate a lot of the times, but like Emmie kind of alluded to, there are a lot of telltale signs that can help you pinpoint the differences, like the malnourishment and, you know, no eye contact and things of that nature. But I think, you know, just ultimately, if you see something suspicious, you know, report it. There is the human trafficking hotline. There are resources available that, you know, can connect you to experts who will help you through it.
And once again, it's that adage of, if you see something, say something.
Exactly.
If you're not sure, see something, say something. Ladies, thank you so much for coming and being with us and enlightening us and sharing with us today, National Human Trafficking Day. More than 10,000 calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline each year, and that's just a fraction of the victims in the United States. Well, today is Human Trafficking Awareness Day. Attorneys at 11 Papantonio Rafferty are involved in several cases right now. They point to two prime reasons victims end up in Northwest Florida. One, we're a tourist destination, and we're located on a major highway, Interstate 10. Attorney Carissa Phelps says victims are sometimes hard to recognize.
But we want to be able to see the flags and report it. What we have to do first, I think, is really understand how this is a human crime. So if someone is transforming someone's free will into their will, they're actually trying to make it look like it's their choice to be there. So it's very complicated to identify it and say, oh, that person has chains on, so they're being trafficked. It doesn't always happen that way.
And some of the red flags that a person is being trafficked, they're kept in isolation and watched when they talk to anyone. They owe money to their employer, or their boss threatens to have them deported. Now, if you do suspect human trafficking, you can call law enforcement, call Crime Stoppers, or the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Well, today is National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. Human trafficking is the exploitation of another person for labor or commercial sexual activity by force, fraud, or coercion. The Levin Papantonio Rafferty law firm says it happens right here in our own community.
There's more trafficking happening than we want to believe. And those people sometimes are brought here from other locations, from within the state, from out of state. And because we're on this corridor, it's very easy for traffickers to stay on the move and continue their operations.
If you or someone you know needs help, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That number, 888-373-7888. Or you can text Be Free at 233-733.
Well, it's National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. The U.S. Department of State estimates that roughly 15,000 people are trafficked into the U.S. every year. The International Labor Organization estimates that approximately 25 million people are forced into labor worldwide at any given time. Levin Papantonio Rafferty law firm says it's important to understand trafficking as a complicated crime where it can be hard to recognize the signs.
So it's very complicated to identify it and say, oh, that person has chains on, so they're being trafficked. It doesn't always happen that way. So when a person becomes a commodity, the first thing a trafficker wants to do is to break their mind and to make it look as if it's their choice. So it's always look beneath the surface, ask more questions, have human relationships with people so that you really understand what's going on. I have friends who were identified by neighbors in their community as having been trafficked. And that's so important that we build relationship, we know what's going on in our own communities.
Now, if you or someone you know needs help, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That's 888-373-7888. Or you can text Be Free at 233-733.